talk about SQL Server Administration. This is our second to the last topic for midterms. So the following are the agenda. We have SQL Server Platform Overview. We'll talk about managing databases, database maintenance and data protection, securing SQL Server, and managing database objects and best practices. So let's start our discussion with SQL Server 2005 platform. In every relational database server, the following are its goals. First, it should be reliable. So every time you request a data, it should be complete and correct. Availability. Every time a query is executed, that data should be readily be available to the requestor. Scalability. The SQL Server should be able to manage the expansion of data. And then performance, data integrity and protection, transaction isolation. When we say transaction isolation, if there are concurrent requests for the database server, the first requestor will be given the priority. That certain tuple that will be accessed will then be locked to that certain user. And then after the transaction, the second requester will then be catered. No? So there will be an isolation for that request. We also know that the SQL Server has reporting tools and so has data analysis. We'll explore data analysis and its reporting features on finals when we talk about data warehousing. So an SQL Server database engine consists of two parts. So the storage engine and then the query engine. The storage engine will be the one to manage the physical files of the database, and the query engine will be the one to manage the different structure requests for the database. As we all know, databases are logical collections of related objects. Now, every time you install an SQL Server, it would create an instance. If you could still remember when we had the installation of the SQL Server at the laboratory, you were asked to choose between default instance and name instances. Now, when you choose the default instance, the SQL Server will then assign a default name, which is usually the computer name. And when you choose the named instance, it will then give you the liberty to give the name for that certain server. Now, remember that an instance is the same concept with the object-oriented programming, that an object is an instance of a class. So when you create an object, a new object of the SQL Server, it is an instance of the original SQL Server, which could or which has all the properties for an SQL Server to manage the database. So these are the different services that are available in SQL Server. So for instance specific, we have SQL Server Agent Services, Analysis Services, and so on. When we say instance specific, every time you install a new instance of an SQL Server, you will have also a separate service for that. No? So when you have two SQL servers, there should be two SQL Server service available. Now, there are also common services for SQL Server. We have notification service, integration, and so on. So these services are readily available every time you install or every time you had the first installation of an MS SQL Server. So when we talk about SQL Server Management Studio, it is the database management GUI of the SQL Server. So it was based on Visual Studio 2005 IDE, supporting for writing and executing queries. So we have done already many queries executed using the tool directly to the database. Now, there is also this feature of SQL Server 2005, which is the SQL Business Intelligence Development Studio. We'll explore this one when we get to data warehousing discussion. So the following are the administrative tools. So let's explore each one of them. So we start with SQL Server Profiler.